Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Hunger Hunt Feast. Today, I'm going to talk about the wonderful disease called gout. If you've ever suffered from it, you know there's nothing wonderful about it. It's absolutely miserable. If you haven't, you just heard about it. That sounds like something that's, they talk about with kings from, 17th century Europe who are eating lots of meat, drinking lots of beer. It's a very modern disease. So we're going to get into what causes it because you always hear meat and maybe seafood, right? And then some alcohol as being the main causes. And I want to give you a different perspective today on what would be driving the incidence of gout, especially in the Western world, the US in particular, um, this day and age, right now. What's it from our diet that I would like to, of course, take the stance it's not red meat because we just don't eat that much of it. Nothing compared to what we did even 200 years ago or 400 years ago or 4,000 years ago in certain cultures where they ate much more meat, right? Okay, not every culture did, but many more. And gout is just not simply a byproduct of too much red meat or seafood. So let's get into it. First, now we see first descriptions of it in 2600 BC, Egypt. They had gout. Now they also had a high rates of obesity and diabetes, believe it or not, for the time. Now, Egypt was a grain-based culture, known for its grain, lots of grain silos, and they're some of the earliest makers of beer, maybe preceded in history only by Mesopotamia, also grain producers. But it's a great way to preserve grain because bread will go moldy, but beer can last, right? So earliest producers of beer, grain-based culture. We see instances of diabetes, obesity in their royalty primarily, and gout. Now, moving forward into where we think of it, 16th, 17th, 18th century, 19th century wealth in Europe. Yes, wealthy people could afford meat. They could also afford alcohol, and a much more rare and precious commodity than meat was sugar. Very prized commodity coming over from the East. They didn't produce sugar in Europe, and again, when it came in, start coming in. It was only the wealthy that could afford it until about the late 1800s, when it basically started getting more production and more of it coming in. So greater supply meant the price came down. More people could afford it. But in the 1600s, 1700s, it really was something that only the wealthy could afford to buy or spend money on. Now, we do see instances of, or read about, I should say, in history of monks getting gout. Dominican monks, Trappist monks. Okay, obviously not wealthy. Probably didn't eat much meat. Go through times of fasting, right? But what monks are known for is producing beer, good beer, very good beer, and throughout Germany and Belgium, much of northwestern Europe, monks produced beer in their monasteries. So while they didn't have much meat, didn't have much money, they had beer, or they had, and many times not just from grain, but beer made from honey, which is called mead, which was common again early mid 16 1700s, really going farther back than that till Middle Ages Europe. Honey as a source for the sugar in the beer. But yes, monks are known for their beer making. So that we have another incidence where maybe meat was not the cause. Now, meat and seafood do give off the byproduct of purines in metabolism, which purines convert to uric acid, and that is known. I'm not saying meat and seafood aren't a source of purines, but I would argue they are not a high source of purines compared to other foods. Certainly not compared to alcohol, and particularly beer. But I would also say that sugar is, especially in modern times, the primary source of gout, or driver of gout, or uric acid, because fructose, when metabolized in the liver, as it always is, predominantly in the liver, probably 90% in the liver, produces uric acid as a metabolic byproduct within minutes. Within minutes, you can see uric acid increasing in the system after eating sugar. Now, the incidence of gout in the US has doubled in the last 30 to 40 years. Now, we can look at charts. I mean, you can see them all over. Well, the people I follow, I can see them all over the internet, lots of carnivores and so forth, showing, and low carb dieters, high protein dieters, showing we're eating less red meat than ever before, especially since like mid 70s to early 80s, when we had the food pyramid come out, all that. We're eating less red meat, more grains, more sugar, more seed oils. So seed oils being omega-6 grain-based oils like soybean, corn, canola, safflower, sunflower, all those things. No, not olive oil or avocado oil. Those aren't seeds, they're not omega-6. Those are, well, they are, but they're actually monounsaturated. They're not polyunsaturated. So they are unsaturated, but they're not poly. They're not the PUFAs. So the PUFA oils from seed oils. Done several podcasts on that. Check back for details on why those are so inflammatory. So we're eating more sugar, more seed oils, more grains, and more chicken. All that has increased. Red meat has gone down over the last 100 years, really in the last 50. Now, if there's about 4% of the US population suffers with gout. Okay. And if you know anybody who's had it, like usually they're over 40, and maybe it's strongly associated with metabolic disease. So you can have gout without being overweight or having other symptoms of metabolic disease, but it's generally associated with metabolic disease. So obesity, or being overweight, hypertension, high blood pressure, right? Kidney disease, fatty liver, visceral fat, those things. Strong association with people who suffer with those, one or more of those symptoms, are also at greater risk for gout statistically. Now, uric acid, for gout to form, not only do you produce uric acid, because a lot of people produce we all produce uric acid to some degree. Even if you're overproducing it, uric acid converts to crystals, which form in the joint, usually the joint of the big toe. But they condense and then turn into these crystals that create like a type of really arthritis in that joint. It's just pain in that joint when it's moving. Again, extremely painful. One of the most painful things you may experience. But it builds up in the kidneys and it's unable to be eliminated. Now we think about hypertension. Hypertension involves the retention of fluid in the kidneys, generally driven by insulin. So when insulin levels are high, you're going to hold more fluid in the kidneys. Sugar will cause more fluid in the kidneys to be held, not salt. Sugar will drive more fluid to be held in the kidneys, and then therefore more pressure in the cardiovascular system, the vascular system, causing hypertension, high blood pressure. So let's think about more retention of fluid in the kidneys driven by insulin. Uric acid builds up in the kidneys and it's unable to be eliminated. Could you see how those things could be related? Now, about 2/3 of the uric acid is endogenous. So it's made by the body. Okay. And it's considered by many just a waste product, but it does, some will tell you, yes, it has some function in the body, can work as an antioxidant. I don't think that's totally relevant, but just know that there is some, you might hear that. There's some people say, hey, it works as an antioxidant, it has a role in the body. That's why we produce it. That's not the role that I'm going to talk about, that I think it does have, why we produce this. But I want to explain a little deeper why fructose produces so much more of it. Any excess uric acid, though, is usually excreted through the urine or the bowels in some way. We do get rid of. We have a process for getting rid of excess uric acid if we have it, because again, 2/3 of it's produced endogenously, and then our diet can affect up to 20-30% of it. So if we do have an excess production of the diet, and then from food that we're eating, and then we on top of that, because there's no guarantee, just because you produce a lot of it doesn't mean you're going to get gout. Again, only 4% of the population suffers with gout. Well, we have a lot. I mean, we just talked about how our diet has changed, right? Red meat consumption has gone down. Grain, seed oil, sugar consumption, and alcohol probably as well. Well, we'll see alcohol, but chicken consumption has gone up. Okay. So we've seen higher incidence of obesity, right? We have 35% of the countries are is obese, 70%, give or take, is overweight. We're saying only 12-13% have type 2 diabetes. I say that number, especially after 2020. We saw a lot of undiagnosed people with diabetes suffering with COVID. So I'd say, we're closer to probably 25% is at least, if not diabetic, pre-diabetic. And that number goes up every single year. Gout is only 4%. They're closely related. They're closely related. Gout, only 4% of the population. Now, still, that's more than we should have. But what I'm saying is you can have a lot of uric acid production endogenously or from your diet, affected by your diet, and still not get gout because your body's able to excrete it effectively. So you have to have a combination of a large amount of it, or a large production of it, I should say, and a difficulty excreting it, which again could be produced from a kidney problem, hypertension, some level of metabolic disease having an effect on that. Or some people are just given to produce more of it than others genetically. There's definitely a genetic component, and there's certain genetic components among different races. We don't need to get into that. That's not really what this is about, because you can't control those things. I want to talk about what we can control. So again, about 90% of the population, or 90% of gout is really about not being able to get rid of it. Only about 10% of people who get gout, of the 4% of the U.S. population, 10% of those are having the problem of overproducing, where they're just over and above what the average person produces. And that could be from, diet or genetics. That's really 10% of the problem. 90% of it is not being able to get rid of it. And that could be, as I've mentioned, closely tied to the issue with insulin resistance and kidney problems. Okay. And it's an excretion problem. Again, because insulin resistance causes the fluid retention in the kidneys, hypertension. So that addressed, again, that's a problem that would be more of an acute, could be resolved through improved insulin sensitivity and a low carb diet, allowing you to get rid of more fluid. As we know, if you've been on a low carb diet, you lose a lot of fluid and your fluid level stays low, and you might have to work a little extra hard to stay hydrated, right? But you might purge that a little better. But let's start by addressing what would cause an excess production that is controllable, not what your body does endogenously, not what you might do genetically. But since they could be closely tied to what limits excretion, let's talk about what could cause some overproduction, since everyone wants to address it in diet by saying red meat's the culprit. That's what I want to address. Is red meat and, say, seafood, are red meat and seafood really the issue? Now, nobody argues alcohol and beer. We're all in agreement on that. And beer, not just beer for the alcohol, but beer, even non-alcoholic beer, can cause it because of the brewer's yeast, again, converted through as metabolized and creating a uric acid byproduct. But fructose, okay, so that'd be half of high fructose corn syrup and sugar, and many fruits converts to uric acid in the liver, half that sugar. So the glucose half can be metabolized not only in the liver, but in most muscles and the brain. Okay. Fructose is not really not metabolized at all in muscles or in the brain. It's primarily in the liver, with some would say, a little bit of it can be metabolized in the kidney and in fat cells. Okay. Vast majority, say 80 to 90+% of it, is metabolized in the liver. Probably more like 90+. And there's a reason for this. All right. It's used, fruit is used by many animals to fatten up, to put fat on their body prior to migration, like with birds migrating, flying south for the winter or back north when it gets warm again, or before a period of hibernation. So animals, squirrels, different animals, or before a seasonal food shortage, which is when humans would eat it. Think about, yes. And I'm talking about the natural sugar that's in fruit. Really not much different than what's in table sugar, other than the fact that there's a lot more fiber around it, and you have to eat a lot more fruit to get the same amount of sugar and the same amount of food, obviously. But it's what nature provides us, was provided to us at the end of summer, late summer, right? Early fall, depending on the fruit, to help animals and humans fatten up before winter, before there's a food shortage. Okay. So why would that happen? Well, survival. It's about survival. Hummingbird, for instance, will, before migration, will buzz around and eat all the nectar it can from fruit, from flowers, essentially fructose, to drive fatty liver disease and insulin resistance, essentially metabolic disease in this hummingbird that's flapping its wings like crazy, right? We all seen hummingbirds. They move more than anybody else, right? On the planet, pretty much. And they'll get up to 40%. They can be some of the fattest birds, for sure. Fattest of all birds when they're plumping up before migration. About 40% fat. That's crazy. 40%. And they're still able to move around like that to stay above, in the air at 40% fat. But then they'll fly 400 miles nonstop without eating, obviously. So they do a fasted workout, a very long fasted workout, and hope they make it. Hope, because they will burn off all of that fat, and some of them run out of steam and don't quite make it. Yeah, sad. They didn't get fat enough. But this is the process. I mean, this is, monkeys do the same to get through a seasonal shortage of food, like a dry season for them, but they'll fatten up on fruit before then. When it comes, they'll just eat it until there's, they've got a little extra layer on them. We all know bears and berries and salmon, right? Fatten up before winter, and then they sleep for 6 to 8 months without eating. So fructose, so when metabolized in the liver, fructose actually is somewhat damaging to the mitochondria that are creating energy. So mitochondria usually take in, if they're taking glucose, they're going to increase or put out ATP. ATP is the energy that our muscles burn. Well, when we metabolize fructose or fructose, depending on how you like it pronounced, I've heard PhDs pronounce it each way. So take your choice, tomato, honestly. But it decreases the amount of ATP available. So we have energy coming in, less available energy coming out of this process. ATP is decreased. Mitochondria are oxidized. They're actually damaged to some degree. And it can reduce, if there's enough of it, can reduce the number of mitochondria. Not good, right? Excess of mitochondria. So that we can see how that would lead to a problem with a metabolic disease. But it also downregulates the insulin receptors in the liver, which would lead to insulin resistance. And so throughout the body, not just, it starts at the liver, and then it would affect the rest of the body, which would, of course, increase fat production and fat storage in the liver. So again, metabolizing fructose, we have a decrease in ATP. Where does that energy go? Well, it's converted into fat and stored in the liver. Fructose is pretty much converted to fat. Especially, and this is in comparison to glucose. Okay. So let's think about this for a second in terms of what we normally think of as a calorie, right? This stimulates fat accumulation or deposits in liver independent of how many calories are being eaten. In other words, you don't have to be in a caloric excess because it actually decreases the energy that's being available energy being produced. So we basically within the metabolism of fructose, we see an absolute about face on a calorie is just a calorie. And when you think about the metabolic effect of this food matters more than the amount of energy that it's bringing. Because again, it doesn't just turn into readily available energy. No matter how much it is, it's converted to fat. So we have a fat deposit, despite the fact that you might still be in a caloric deficit. Pretty wild. So from this metabolism, the oxidation of the mitochondria, the fat deposit, the decrease of ATP, it's really in the decrease of ATP turning into AMP that we get uric acid as a byproduct. And as I mentioned before, we can see increases in uric acid in the body minutes after eating sugar, after eating fructose. And again, the purpose being, you're questioning this. Some of you might be questioning this because, well, how can fruit be bad for you? It's not that it's bad for you. It has a purpose. And we've taken sugar, which is meant to be maybe packaged in a fruit and in some starchy vegetables that have some fructose, like some tubers, but basically that's primarily in fruit. And we've concentrated it into sugar, and then we've created our own type with high fructose corn syrup. And we're mainlining it. We've concentrated it, and we're taking in more of it than we're supposed to be, and we're taking in all year long. The purpose is to create fat storage and decrease available energy so you can fatten up to get through the winter. The problem is we never have a food shortage in the US, right? In the Western world, there's no food shortage. Winter never really comes. Winter never comes. We never go without food. We don't have a food shortage. We don't have a 400-mile migration. We don't go 6 months without eating to burn off the fat, although many people have enough stored fuel in them to do just that, right? So it has its purpose. That is the purpose. It may not be your purpose. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means we're misusing it. And we have our paradigm around fruit and sugar is tremendously skewed. We use it for our emotions. We use it as a reward. We use it sad, happy, or an everyday treat, or a reward for a good workout, of all things. In large doses, we blend it up into liquid and just send it right in. And that's when we have the problems. Now, I'm going to show you some statistics on the effect. We're going to compare sugar, fructose, to, say, meat. And it is a correlation study. I'm going to give you that. It's correlation. Okay. But it's a strong one. But again, its purpose is to create fat storage and decrease available energy and create insulin resistance so that weight can be put on to get through a period when energy will be limited. Available food will be limited. Alcohol, much like sugar, it's just a fermented sugar, honestly. And so much more of that, a little bit of that is processed in the brain, but again, it's processed primarily in the liver, just like fructose. And beer, again, being the worst because it's got the alcohol and the brewer's yeast. So again, with fat in the liver, we got fatty liver disease. Again, we correlate it with metabolic disease, uric acid causing gout. But the uric acid, or the process of metabolizing the fructose, which gives us uric acid as a byproduct, also causes fatty liver disease, insulin resistance. And we have metabolic disease, right? Because we have the visceral fat building up, diabetes, heart disease, kidney disease, obesity, it all correlates. They're all related. You'll see why. So from a study, there's a description from a study of which I have listed in the show notes. Administration of fructose rapidly depletes ATP in the human liver and can significantly reduce ATP levels in vascular endothelial cells. Endothelial, the lining of your arteries. Decrease energy levels in the lining of your arteries, which are used to what? Move blood through, contract, expand, right? And let's face it, that's where plaques form, right? So this effect of fructose and the ATP depletion can act like a type of ischemia in the vascular system. So basically a reduction of blood flow to your arteries, to your vascular system. Not good. Can cause a transient arrest of protein synthesis. So basically that would be structural production of protein. So if repair, protein synthesis is used for repair. If there's damage, you have protein synthesis to repair or replace tissue. And the production of inflammatory proteins. So these wouldn't be proteins you eat. These are basically things that cause inflammation. Your body's made up of proteins. There's lots of different types of proteins. These are not proteins that would be used for muscle or for structure. So they're inflammatory in that they might be part of your immune system that goes and causes, or the process of inflammation and then a response. So, but they cause, or actually they're ROS. I think reactive oxygen species who have an oxidized protein. Could be from the sugar causing the browning, right? Causing as simply as I put it, oxidation of the protein, which is inflammatory. And so endothelial dysfunction, arterial dysfunction, and just general oxidative stress. Again, more inflammation. Inflammation is known to cause insulin resistance, is it not? And other sorts of other diseases related to all disease and aging. Again, from the study, fructose is also highly lipogenic, so which means it produces fat. Stimulates triglyceride synthesis, so more triglycerides pumping out by the liver, which would do what? If you have more triglycerides, you have a higher LDL. Everybody's scared of LDL when you look at the quality, when you look at not just the amount you have more, but what's it made up of. We look at triglycerides, and is that number high or low? Is that under 100, above 100? More triglycerides, higher LDL number, that's when you should be worried. You have an insulin resistant environment and high triglycerides, you have a problem. If you have an insulin sensitive environment and low triglycerides, and don't sweat your cholesterol, probably isn't a problem. Okay. And increases, again, the fat deposition in the liver, fatty liver. So that's, again, you can see the parallel between the effects of fructose on not just on gout, but also all these forms of metabolic disease, arterial problems, triglyceride, high triglycerides, oxidative stress in general, fatty liver. And so there's actually a study, 2008 study, who found that men who drink 2 or more sugary sodas daily have an 85% higher risk for gout, specifically gout, not insulin resistance, just gout, than men who drink less than 1 soda a month. So 85% is a big increase in risk. 2 sodas a day versus 2 or more sodas a day versus 1 soda a month or less. They've also linked fruit juice and even certain types of fruit like apples and oranges to gout risk. 2 glasses or more of fruit juice a day were nearly twice as likely to get gout, to cause gout, as those who drank less than a glass a day. Not less than like a, a soda, it was less than one a month, less than a glass a day. 2 glasses a day or more versus less than a glass a day, almost twice as likely to get gout from fruit juice. Are you saying the sugar is different? Not really. It's not. So this I found this study. It was the study this is referred to. That was a post from arthritis.org on their blog post. So this study was actually published in the British Medical Journal, called Sugary Drinks, Fruit, and Increased Risk of Gout. And here's specific percentages here. We got, again, as I mentioned before, 2 servings a day of a soft drink, sugar sweetened soft drink. So it did not happen for diet sodas. It was sugar sweetened only. So we know it's tied to the sugar. Increased risk of developing gout by 85%, right? A 49% increase from drinking what they noted as 15 to 30 grams a day of alcohol. Okay. So yeah, I don't measure my alcohol in grams either. So let's convert that. 15 to 30 grams. 30 grams of alcohol is about 1 ounce. So half an ounce to an ounce of alcohol, not a lot of alcohol. That's one little shot. If you pour one little shot in a drink and put a mixer in it, okay, that's just the alcohol. 1 ounce. 49% increase from drinking half an ounce to an ounce of alcohol per day versus not. 21%, okay, eating extra serving of meat, an extra serving of meat. So let's say whether it's serving is 4 ounces or 8 ounces, it was not specific that I saw. But they said extra serving of meat. We can assume it's not a 2 ounce serving, right? That's not a serving. A serving could be 4, could be 8. Either way, serving of meat, the one that everybody's so worried about, everyone warns, oh, just reduce your meat. Stop eating meat. Meat causes gout. 21% increased risk from an extra serving, not from eating meat at all, from eating an extra serving of meat. Okay, you compare it to 2 sodas or 2 glasses of juice or half an ounce of alcohol, which is more than double that risk. 95% increased risk of getting gout from having a body mass index, a BMI, between 25 and 30. That's considered overweight. Now, if you're a lean, muscular guy, you're probably not, the BMI for some of us doesn't really affect. We're on borderline because we're carrying more muscle than the average person when they made the BMI in the 1960s. But that was a body mass index of 25 to 29 versus 21 to 22. So 95% increase from 21 to 22 to 25 to 29. That doesn't sound like a big jump there, 22 to 25, does it? But it increased the risk because most people who are between 25 and 29 are overweight. Over 30 is considered obese. 25, 29, that's overweight. Here we go, guys. The fruit juice. Consuming 2 or more glasses of fruit juice each day increased risk by 81%. Remember, the soda was 85. This is 81. Okay, that was compared to eating or to 1 glass or less of fruit juice. 2 or more glasses of fruit juice increased risk by 81%. So that your big fruit smoothie after your workout, or as your pre-workout, it doesn't matter, or just have with your well-balanced breakfast, have a glass of juice or 2, increase your risk of gout 81%. Remember, the meat serving, extra meat serving, not any meat, extra meat serving, 1 more serving of meat, 21%. 2 more glasses of fruit juice, 81% increased risk. Am I driving this home yet? I'm just, sorry if I seem a little too excited about this, but this is it. It's fructose. Here we go. My fruit lovers. I'm not saying I don't like fruit, but those who defend it as being completely harmless, I'm sorry. That's not what the statistics show. Eating an apple or an orange a day No, it did not keep the doctor away. Eating an apple and orange a day increased the risk of getting gout by 64% in this study. Take that in. Eating an apple or an orange a day increased risk by 64%. It's fructose, guys. Common denominator in all those. Fructose, other than the alcohol, which is fermented fructose. Again, now it is an excretion problem, as I mentioned. But if you want to have less of an excretion problem, you can produce less of it by managing your diet, or have healthier kidneys and carry and lower hypertension, lower blood pressure or normal blood pressure, and can carry less excess fluid by managing your sugar intake and being insulin sensitive. Because insulin resistance does cause fluid retention. So there are medications, obviously, to neutralize. If you have a flare up, you have an attack, you get medications. You deal with the medications. Okay, diet and is the long-term prevention. You get a flare up, you get medications. There's allopurinol to neutralize the purines, and they usually give you something for the pain. Very strong anti-inflammatory to bring the pain down. And you treat it acutely because it's an acute attack, and it's very, 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 very painful. Some more natural approaches to help basically alleviate some of the acidity in your kidneys and your urine. Would recommend taking potassium citrate, supplement potassium citrate, or a teaspoon of baking soda in about 8 to 12 ounces of water. Again, it's just to get something that neutralizes acid, a base, so to speak, to neutralize the acid in your kidneys, through your liver, right, through your system. You're not going to change the acidity of your blood. I'm not talking about that, so you might flip out because we know that's just kind of silly. Your blood has a very narrow alkaline to acid level. It has to stay in. Now, what it does to stay there, that should be addressed. How much work it takes to stay there based on your diet. Okay, you can go there, but your acid level of your blood is not going to change. Acidity of your urine definitely could, because that's how you get rid of it. So teaspoon of baking soda and water, potassium citrate. And then you're doing anything you can to stop the pain. So at that point, why not? Right? It can't hurt you. I just wouldn't take either of those right before or after a meal, because you need your stomach acid to digest your food. So don't do that right before or after a meal. I'd put a few hours between your meals to, when you do that, to reduce the acid level. But, again, that's when you have an acute flare up. Now, it's not uncommon for people who, well, let me put it this way. It's not common with people who start a low carb or keto diet, but it's not uncommon if people have a flare up, if they have a propensity for gout and they have a problem with excretion, after starting a low carb diet or a keto diet, to have a flare up. Now, this happens with other issues as well, related to toxins that are stored in the body. You're breaking down a lot of fat at one time. And we know that's where toxins are stored. Our body tries to get rid of certain toxins or manage toxins, even some bacteria, viruses, right, by storing it away in fat cells and then tuck them away from organs, right, and extremities. Now, you start breaking down that fat, well, some of those toxins are going to get released in your bloodstream. So you might feel bad, you might feel groggy. That's usually what happens. Some people even throw a kidney stone to start off. Doesn't mean don't do it. That's just part of the process, because you got to lose the weight. You're going to die from insulin resistance or metabolic disease earlier, for sure. If you have some discomfort in the early stages, it's not permanent. It's not long-term. It's not like for 6 months you're dealing with this. We're talking about weeks, matter of weeks. Early part, you're going to break down some fat. You really get into the keto or the low carb enough that you're really breaking down some body fat. You're going to have some stuff released in your system from, that you put there. Okay. You put it there. Your body just moved out of the way to deal with it, stuffed it in a fat cell. But of course, just like you lose a lot of water when you start a low carb diet, which can also allow toxins to be more concentrated. So drink water when you're starting a low carb diet, keto diet, trying to burn a lot of fat, especially at first, until you adjust to it. I mean, because you can have elevated cortisol levels, elevated stress levels. Some people deal with sleep issues. It's part of your body's adjustment to the changes you're making. It will adjust. All those things will come back to normal. It's short term. You don't let that keep you from your long-term health. But in the meantime, and you're going to do this long-term, really is drink more water, ideally with like a no sugar electrolyte mix. I use Relight, made by Redmond's Real Salt out of Utah. Redmond Real Salt, excuse me. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. It's a great, my whole family uses it actually. It's a great electrolyte, keeps the water in you with minerals, put some minerals in that you need to keep your electrolytes balanced. Salt, potassium, magnesium, calcium, it's all in there. It's not enough to say to get your mineral needs for your whole body, right? The daily mineral needs, but it's enough to keep the fluid in you when you're eating low carb. You just don't hold a lot of fluid. You don't have high insulin levels. You don't have carbohydrates, bring in 3 grams of water per 1 gram of carb. So there's an adjustment there if you're used to eating carbs. So keeping some water in your system not only helps you feel better, keeps your blood pressure at a normal level, but it can help dilute some of those toxins and help you get rid of them, because you're going to be, you start a low carb diet, you're peeing all the time anyway, right? So stay hydrated. Don't get dehydrated. That's part of the grogginess is usually a loss of sodium or potassium. So it helps a lot of those symptoms of starting out with a keto diet. But again, your body will adjust. If you have a flare-up, yes, take the medication, do the potassium citrate and baking soda if you feel like it. Avoid sugar, avoid alcohol. If you feel like you need to, or you eat a lot of red meat, you want to go to a white meat temporarily, avoid red meat and like shellfish, seafood. Sure. During the flare-up, that's not what caused it. Your red meat and your shellfish didn't cause the gout. Once again, most of the time it's an excretion problem. And the greater, as we've seen through those numbers, increased risk, not so much from the extra serving of red meat, but from the extra servings of fructose and alcohol. So, I mean, I know people that eat 2-3 pounds of meat a day, and I'm certainly pushing over a pound most of the time. So, including liver, which organ meats are supposed to be, again, not just the meat, but the liver, kidney, heart, those all increase purines. Liver every day, red meat almost pretty much every day. On the occasion, we might have some pork, which could certainly throw off purines, but chicken. But generally, there's red meat in my diet every day, and sometimes it's over a pound with everything else I'm eating. And it's not an issue. It's not going to, in and of itself, meat is not going to cause gout. You have to have a propensity for it. And then you have to have an excretion problem. Okay, so we don't fear red meat because of gout. Again, 4% of the population is dealing with it, only 4%. And as you've probably seen, the increase of it would correlate quite nicely with increase in sugar intake, not red meat. So improve your insulin sensitivity, your weight loss, reduce your liver and visceral fat, your blood pressure. Obviously fruit is not the only source. It's a source. If you have a flare, if you have a problem with it, reduce your fruit. That's going to have a greater impact than meat, as we've seen. But the main source is sugar, high fructose corn syrup, sodas, sweet teas, processed food. Okay, so just because you don't drink it or eat fruit, it's coming in. Processed food, cereals, wheat bread, salad dressing. Most salad dressings in the grocery store, they have high fructose corn syrup in it, right? Your healthy, wonderful energy bars, snack bars, protein shakes, and of course, juice, as we mentioned, all has fructose. You want to limit your risk of gout or the insulin resistance and all the other things that go with that. Metabolic disease. Don't sweat the meat. Focus on the processed food and the sugar and the alcohol. So a great resource. Now I'm going to link to some of these studies, several studies here. In the show notes, you can see the study I mentioned with the percentages of risk based on the food or the intake of certain foods, as well as the impact on endothelial tissue, as I mentioned before. But a great book on the effect of fructose on, really not specific to gout, but to metabolic disease, is called The Fat Switch by Ronald Johnson, MD. Again, called The Fat Switch. Great book. It really, if you want to get into the biochemistry of it, he explains it very well, very simply. It's not overly complicated. Explains the process well. There's plenty of examples, as well as some science and some references and studies and so forth. But The Fat Switch by Ronald Johnson, I'll link to that in the show notes as well. But plenty of evidence to show this, but we don't hear about it. We don't hear about sugar, high fructose corn syrup. We hear about alcohol, and when it goes to meat, we don't hear about sugar's effect on uric acid. I don't know why. I mean, some doctors don't realize this. Okay. But clearly far more of an impact than our precious red meat. It's precious to me anyway. Meat is my love language. So anyway, different story. But let's stop blaming meat for what fructose and alcohol are doing. Have a great week.